We'll start this meeting with our territorial acknowledgement. We recognize and respect that we live and meet within the unceded territories of the Columbia Basin Indigenous Nations peoples. I need a motion to approve the agenda. So, okay, thank you. A second?
Nobody else here. You got it going on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And all in favor? That carries. Thank you. Next, the approval of the minutes. Second. All in favor? That carries. Okay. Well, we'd like to start with some introductions. Let's some pictures. Yes. Remco.
Well, I guess I'm the first sitting in.
Yeah.
So my name is Remco McKenzie. I am located in Cranbrook. I've been the manager in Cranbrook for several years. Started under BC Transit 13 years ago. And recently I also oversee management on the West Kootenay. So now East and West.
There we go. And Anna.
Yep, I'm the operations manager of the West Kootenay. I'm based out of Trail and I work alongside Remco. And I just recently took over that role and I was previously since with it for the past year.
Anna, how do you pronounce your last name?
We don't know, Manchado.
Yeah, what do you say that? Manchado. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Briar.
I'm Briar Albano. I'm the Associate Vice President of Student Success at Salford College.
Thanks. And Briar, I think you're going to be presenting a little bit later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to talk a little bit on enrollment.
Yeah, well, welcome. Okay, Danica, we're going to move to reports. This is the bulk of the meeting, so over to you.
Figure out how I screen share.
I got it up for you.
Okay, and how are you good at it better? Perfect. Right. All right, I have a whole bunch of updates on various different topics today. Most of them are pretty brief, so please feel free to ask questions, seek clarification, or if you want to dive into any of these particular topics as I go through the presentation, please feel free. So hopefully most of you remember me. I know it's been a little while. I'm Jane White, the Government Relations Manager for the Thompson and Kootenay region. I was on maternity leave last year, and you would have seen my colleague Elise, who was covering for me. But I've been in point of contact with local government partners and lead the annual partner communication. These are some of our annual partner communications. So there are several touch points throughout the year between local governments and BC Transit. The first one is our annual operating agreements. So I'm almost done sending those out to our funding partners for the agreements between regional districts and the city of Nelson as funding partners. That also includes the 25-26 transit budgets. And these will go to the boards and council for approval in the next couple months. So you'll be seeing those again in more detail. We're also in the early stages of the transit improvement program right now. So that's our annual opportunity to request additional funding from the province to implement service expansions. I'll touch on that a little bit more at the end of the presentation. And then later this summer, I'll also have annual performance summaries for 2024, as well as 3-year budgets to present to local governments. So in the meantime, until our annual performance summaries are available, I did pull some sort of system performance data for the West Kootenay transit system as a whole. Most of this is from our onboard passenger counters, and it's not perfect data, but it does show some trends pretty well, and it has recorded over 500,000 riders in the last year. The blue lines are the weekday service, and orange is weekend service. You can sort of see some trends that we definitely have higher ridership, I'd say, at the beginning of sort of semesters, so September, October, and then again in January. And it does taper off a little bit over the summer, which is pretty typical of transit systems. So if you look at individual routes, we see some pretty big differences in ridership between routes. And this isn't an apples to apples comparison. All of these routes run different, sort of service levels on each of these routes is very different. We do have some trips that only run a couple times a week and others that run, 16 times a day. And you will also notice that I can't seem to find any data for the Route 1 and 2. I'm still looking into that. So it again shows that our APC data isn't perfect. I think there's certainly gaps. I'm still investigating where all of our Route 1 and 2 data is. But it shows trends, and it shows sort of where your high ridership routes are. A little bit about Handy Dart service. So Handy Dart is an accessible door-to-door shared transit service for people with permanent or temporary disabilities that prevent them from using fixed route transit. So there's 3 separate Handy Dart services in the West Kootenay system. There's 2,600 annual service hours for the city of Nelson. Currently there's 78 active clients, and they've recorded over 1,000 annual rides. In Trail and Castlegar, because these are sort of delivered under one operating contract, they are sort of lumped together. We've got 91 active clients for both, 2,700 annual service hours in Trail and 1,700 annual service hours for Castlegar residents, and over 4,000 rides recorded for each of those Handy Dart systems. So something I take away from this is, like we do, a little bit of a deeper dive and follow-up conversation, probably with Jody, just to get into a little bit more about Handy Dart in Nelson, to see if there is some opportunity to utilize it better, or to see if it's more of a data a data difference for how rides are being recorded, because we're definitely seeing more uptake from Handy Dart clients in Trail and Castlegar. So maybe there's some opportunity locally to enhance service. Take a bit of a look into our big regional connectors. So the first is the Route 98 that provides service between Trail and Castlegar. So in 2023, the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary agreed to fund additional service for the 98 because buses were often full and leaving people behind. And the additional trips, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, were implemented in January of this year. So I want to take a minute to show what that investment did. So this graph shows how full the bus is at various times of day on its northbound journey to Castlegar, and then again on its southbound journey back to Trail. So the green bar shows average boardings, but I want to pay more attention to the blue line, which is the average of max load. So the blue line gives a better idea of how many riders are on the bus at a single point in time, not how many are sort of coming and going. So the vehicles in this fleet can seat 30 passengers. So anytime the blue line is above 30, it means riders are probably standing, which is not ideal for highway travel. And it also introduces this risk that riders waiting for the bus might not be picked up. So this is from September of 2024, which typically has high ridership because of students returning back to school. And we often plan transit around September ridership. So if we plan a system or plan a service to handle ridership in September, we figure it'll be good for the entire year. So if we're looking at sort of route-specific ridership and capacity, we're also often looking at ridership in September. So this graph shows the same information for February, just after the additional trips were added to the schedule. They were added in January. Oh, sorry, there we go. So you can see the average max load is now often around 20. Remember, our buses have seats for 30, which means the bus is well utilized, I'd say, but comfortable for passengers and enough seats to pick up riders all along the trip. And I certainly consider this as sort of a successful expansion and a valuable investment. And I think Brian might talk a little bit more about this later, but I am aware that student ridership has reduced in the last year due to federal policies. And I know that this has also impacted ridership locally and on these regional connectors. So a lot of things have happened other than just the additional investment. So I'm not forgetting that. And certainly that change in international students has taken some pressure off of some of these routes. But in general, I'd say that service levels on the 98 are now a lot better aligned with demand. All right, if we look at the 99, this is the regional connector between Nelson and Castlegar. Again, the graph shows how full the bus is at various times of the day on its northbound journey to Nelson and on its southbound journey back to Castlegar. And the blue line gives a better idea of how many riders are on the bus at a single time. Now the 99 is delivered a little bit differently. It utilizes vehicles from the Nelson fleet and the West fleet. So there's some light duty vehicles that have a seating capacity closer to 15, and then there's these heavy duty buses that have a seating capacity of 32. And you do get fluctuation throughout the day, but we also have vehicle capacities that fluctuate throughout the day. So this graph looks a little bit messier, but you can certainly see that at certain sort of peak times of the day, we are getting into max loads above 30, which means that I'd say comfort level on those trips is probably lower because you're likely having riders stand. We haven't had any pass-ups on this trip this year, so service levels are, I'd also say, generally aligned with demand. And again, the reduction in international students is likely taking some of the pressure off of this and postponing the need for, I'd say, urgent additional investment in this route. Again, yes?
Just quick question. How is it possible that the average max load can be higher than average boardings? Oh, okay. So at that 6:50 a.m., it's, okay.
Like sometimes you've got the big ones out, like the big moors, that gets your average out. But sometimes you get small, you don't. So that.
So at 6:50 a.m., you might swap between the two different size buses depending on the day.
For that I see which data point you're looking at.
Could be standees, right? Like if the max capacity on the bus is 32, and you've got standees or seating capacity, will that drive that up?
Well, I'm not clear on what that graph is actually showing, but is the green line the available seating on the bus? Green bar?
The green bars
Line is the actual people.
the average number of people that get on the bus for that particular trip. And because people can get on and then off, and then on and then off, it doesn't mean that they're all sitting on the bus on the same
Line is
time.
the average. Well,
The average for how many are on the bus at the same time. And again, it's not perfect data, so sometimes there might be data gaps. I'd have to look into that particular anomaly more. Again, it really shows trends.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't look at particular numbers. I'd look at which trips tend to have higher ridership, higher max loads, which ones might be problematic, and then I would look to our operating partners for more specific information, because they're the ones actually sort of delivering this.
That six fifty trip from Baker and Ward is a madhouse.
Yeah.
That's where they'll line up down the street to try and get to Selkirk College.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's what that's indicative of, whether or not the data's correct or not. It's
And
Okay.
and also, you do get your highs and lows because you might have that, very full trip that's going south. And then the bus is coming back empty, so then you'll see a very low one, sort of northbound.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't mean you can do anything about that. The bus has got to come back, and chances are it's going to be empty. So it's sort of, you see these highs and lows, and it's not,
Right.
I'd say, practical to expect that we can modify schedule so that you're always having consistent loads. With these sort of commuter type groups, you are having typically your, full bus, and then it comes back empty, and then it goes, full again to Castlegar. So.
Yeah. Okay.
And we see that, I'd say, typically with our commuter type trips. So man, I think this one, service on the mind, I'm definitely a route we're always monitoring, and I know it wasn't, weren't successful in previous years for getting expansion funding on this one. Some tweaks were made in the schedule to try and improve it. I think in general it's definitely something that should be on the radar for potential investment going forward, but nothing urgent I think is needed. So
just to note, we did add an extra trip last year, did we not? And that would be post this data. So we had, who was the scheduling fellow who came out? Yes, and he worked his magic and harvested a bunch of hours someplace, and we actually got a cost neutral additional trip to tie into that extra 98 too, which I suspect will probably alleviate some of the pain in that photo.
yeah, so so if we look at this more recently, we might see a little bit of a difference. I didn't pull that, but I can. Alright, so UMO is the relatively new electronic fare payment system. So in addition to automatic passenger counters that are on board, that are giving this ridership data, we also now can get a whole bunch of interesting data from UMO. So UMO allows riders to use an app or a reloadable card for payment, and later this year we are expecting the ability to tap credit and debit cards on the bus as well. So even if you are a visitor to the area and you don't want to navigate having a cash of any kind, the idea is you can just tap your credit card and away you go. And a lot of folks are familiar with that. I believe that's how Brantford operates sort of in the greater Vancouver area. So it's been almost a year of having UMO. So right now I'm getting month-to-month data, and it'll be interesting once we start getting sort of annual data and some of our kinks are worked out. It is a new program. It's been a pretty big undertaking for BC Transit to take on from a technology perspective and also from a revenue perspective, because UMO, when people are buying UMO, all of the revenue is essentially being pooled into one big UMO account. And then BC Transit has to split out the revenue to the three different funding partners based off of existing cost share arrangements and based off of routes. And it hasn't been a smooth process. So, yeah, folks like Tom and Amy and Chris with the City of Nelson are, working along with our finance team to make sure that all of the revenue is being attributed to the right partner for that service. So we're working through it. All right. But when riders do use electronic fare to board, it gets linked to the bus route that they're on. So we do get some interesting data out of it. Again, this is just for folks who are using electronic fare. So it's not capturing, I'd say, like cash fare riders, or people using old paper tickets or anything like that. So again, it's a source of data. It is not perfect. It isn't capturing anything, but it does show us good and interesting trends. So right now it's reported month by month. So I've got some data from March. And it shows things like the top 5 routes in terms of total boardings. So you've got the 98, the number 2, the 43, the 99, the 31 showing up as the top routes for March.
I'm going to play bridge in Nelson.
And it also gives us some good dashboard information about riders, who they are, how they buy products. So we see that about half of riders buy their fares through the app. Half like to go to a vendor and purchase fares. Over 67% of riders were students. About half use the app. Nelson City Hall, Nelson Library, and Trail City Hall are, I'd say, by far the most popular vendors of UMO fare products. And then I've got some service delivery that my colleague Anthony is going to talk quickly about, sort of from a more operational perspective, and some of the data that he tracks and monitors. So I'll turn it over to Anthony.
Yeah, it's a bit of an eye chart. Main point to note is, you look in the column on the left for April, that is 12 missed service hours, the entirety of the West Kootenays from City of Nelson's 2 systems and PWT's 2 systems, Trail, Council Bus. So 12 hours is an exceptional effort. That is factoring in drivers unable to show up, construction, weather. So I guess the summary from this slide is the 2 operating partners we have currently in the West Kootenays are doing an exceptional job. Next slide. Another eye chart. You see the consistent theme. Don't try to read the numbers in the wiggly part at the bottom, but just the point to note with that is that they're in an upward trend. On-time performance is, there are timing points throughout each route, and the bus is measured against those timing points, and the goal is 1 minute early and 3 minutes late. So if the bus leaves within that period of time, or it's the timing point within that period of time, it's on time. The byproduct of that not happening is customer service responses coming in and say, I missed the bus, I left early, I left late, I was late for work, I missed an important appointment. So this data is being rolled out this month for operating companies, and it will be conversations between myself and them, so they can track it themselves and look at it live. They don't yet have access to it, but for Anna or Jody or Baron, who are looking at this daily, they'll be able to see how their buses are traveling around Silk Route. They'll get a live pop-up to say the 98 has missed the timing point by 5 minutes. And the advantage of that is they can send out live alerts to say there is construction or there is this happening, and they can advise riders on the spot that the bus is late. So they don't panic, they don't try to find an alternative route. So this is a really important metric, just to see daily metric measurement. You can go next slide.
Can I add one thing? Yeah, really quickly. I just want to point out that every time that there's a complaint that arrives through the online submission system, local government is copied on that complaint. We receive a copy of the complaint and the response, and I want to compliment the operators on the quality of the response. City of Nelson, PWT, the way the complaints are happening, when they come in from the public, oftentimes the public is quite upset because they assume that the bus never came or what have you. The time spent investigating those things and then the very fulsome responses to the public are much appreciated. It's very professional. It's very well handled. I don't think we could be doing a better job of this right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll say that it's probably better now than it was about 1 year,
Much.
which is the goal, right? We don't want to change for the sake of change. So, April last year with a fairly tumultuous transition through two operating companies. So to see positive data and stats coming out now, and I know Mayor Lockwood is very happy with the outcomes as well. So this is a great conversation to have here that things are improving. The big question pointed at me if we were going the other direction. So, next slide. And this is first stop departure. Again, upward trending, which is great. This is a more simple metric. It's does the bus leave the depot and hit its first timing point of the day on time? Because this is the start of the momentum we have for the day. We miss this, and we're chasing our tail the entire day. So if we leave the depot and hit that first timing point, then we're set up for success. On-time performance follows that. And these, again, are two generators for customer service responses, complaints, and we're seeing these go backwards as the trend goes up. Headings. All right, this little doozy. A few weeks ago, we were contacted by City Trail, and they let us know that the building that our transit exchange is attached to was going to be demolished in 3 weeks, which doesn't make me relaxed. It's the opposite. And now James Chandler, thank you very much, has inserted himself into this conversation, meaning we need to relocate the transit exchange for it looked like about 6 months, but James might have an update on that, but we basically need to move it within about a 1 block radius where it changes or scheduling associated with that, because as a rider, we now have different timing points and different places to get on us. So thank you to Remco and Anna who met with the city yesterday and Trail, and now James being involved will get on top of this. I don't know if you want to add any more, James, or if you're comfortable with that.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, just to add, I did connect with Colin McClure at Trail yesterday, and we're going to have a bit of a brainstorming session on what we might be able to do to kind of mitigate the effects that the demolition will bring into to transit and a few things there. I think there's some good options, so I think over the next few days we'll look at these things and we're going to get into the details, so try not to affect the flow and flow and of transit as far as we can. So
Awesome, thanks.
Working through it. Which is also sort of the bit of a theme right now for the new downtown trail transit exchange. So in addition to it likely being relocated, there's also been a lot of work going on planning for a new capital project for a new downtown trail transit exchange. Right now, the 60% detailed design has been completed and it's progressing towards a 95% detailed design. We're working through some challenges raised by the City of Trail regarding sort of the overall timing and location of this project. So more to come on that. But if things continue progressing, we'd expect construction could begin as early as fall 2025.
Danica, just for maybe Anthony, so if I'm understanding correctly, the demolition of the building next to the current exchange it's not temporary. Like you're now trying to find a new location for the upgrade.
So this downtown, the new capital project to have a new exchange at a new location in downtown Toronto has been going on for several years.
Yeah.
I think there's been the intent to purchase and demolish these buildings by the City of Trail also for several years, and now it's just the timing is getting really, really close. And so we're working with, I guess, just different factors that are coming into play. So in some ways they're very different different projects. We'll relocate the exchange temporarily to accommodate, if we have to accommodate the demolition. And then in the background, we're ideally still progressing towards building a new exchange, a block away. So, and that's some of the concerns and questions is just how this is all being navigated and if we are taking the right approach. Because there's a lot going on, and I'm very conscious that this means a lot of change for riders in trail areas who are using these buses, because it's a lot of potential moving around and a lot of construction projects potentially happening between the new build and the demolition. So, it is not all worked out yet. In addition to that, there's also work going on a new transit maintenance facility for trail. So the lease on the current properties with the school district, and that ends July 1st of next year. And BC Transit is continuing to pursue the purchase of a new property in Janelle. So BC Transit is looking to acquire this property in Janelle for about $4 million. It's located just off Highway 22, about 15 kilometers from downtown Trail. And it's a good option. It's been the sort of best option that has come forward in the last couple of years for the current fleet and service levels, and it does allow for longer term sort of growth and potential expansion of the fleet. And to manage costs, BC Transit is intending to just do only sort of the most essential building and yard improvements for the June move-in. That includes things like some site preparation, grading, parking for staff and visitors, some critical lighting and fencing, and IT and safety and security, things that we need for it to be a maintenance facility. All right. The other fun capital project going on is the new downtown Nelson transit exchange. I took a stroll past there yesterday. Construction is definitely still in progress. I can't say it looks like a transit exchange yet, but I trust that it will. We're targeting a June 30th for operational completion of the construction and a sort of in-service date. So that would be the date we're targeting to move the exchange from sort of Warren Baker around the corner to the new transit exchange. So from the rider's perspective, that's when we'd be communicating that there is a new exchange location, and it'll come with some minor routing and scheduling adjustments and a new rider's guide. So some things are, being adjusted up to, I think 5 minutes. So we want to make sure that we're messaging that out so that the appropriate trip planning can be done for riders that rely on getting to and from Nelson. I'll give a little update on our battery electric bus deployment. So we are moving forward with deploying battery electric buses in 8 systems across the province, one of which you'll notice is Nelson. It's very exciting.
Is that what you call it, Gary?
That's what it comes to, yeah.
So 125 buses have been on order from 2 different suppliers, or vendors, whatever you want to call them, or the New Flyer and No Bus. Both are, I don't know if it's the right word, assembled, manufactured in Canada. The trade challenges have certainly been an issue of discussion at BC Transit, in particular with all of the sort of battered electric bus planning and vehicle procurements and all that. It's definitely being considered. The first batch of these buses are on the production line already. And
Danica?
yes.
Director Love.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm just wondering, will BC Transit or Jody go through with the fire department where all the batteries are and stuff like that, how to safely get people out of there if something ever was to happen? Is that something, just because there's those questions out there in the public?
June 11th, we have a site assessment visit from BC Transit's engineering operations. So they'll be going over our facilities, seeing what we need in place before these are delivered. Of course, we've got a lot of challenges in our shop as well of accommodating these buses. So all of that assessment will be happening on June 11th is our visit, and then things progress through there.
So then the fire department actually understands.
They're part of that, yes.
So that way that the public can understand that thing.
Yeah, well, there's big considerations. Actually, our building's going through some improvements right now that are actually introducing fire suppression within the building. So the water supply currently being put into the building actually is timely, because if that is something that we have to move forward with, the capital of that water going into the building should be sufficient if needed.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, Councilor Page?
I don't know if you need to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to riff off that, so we're in the planning stages of something like that, being that these are reactive water, is there are looking at possible other systems, you know, lithium fire, spray, devastating water as well, and what we're doing outside.
I really can't comment because I haven't got into the guts of that yet. So that will be brought up, I'm sure, through June 11th meeting on how that is all, the suppression of that is all part of that meeting. So, great. Yeah. Thanks.
So a little more, I guess, sort of details about where things are at for the deployment in Nelson. So we're anticipating 2 heavy-duty battery electric buses and 2 charging points. The 90% design is complete, and we're pending completion of the charging equipment procurement to finalize the design. Construction might begin as early as October, with these vehicles in service on the road potentially sort of this time next year. And I do want to mention, most things in BC Transit are sort of launched in Victoria, but following the launch of electric vehicles in Victoria, Nelson is expected to be the first community to have electric buses on the road. So that's also pretty exciting for the communities.
Has there been much discussion and learning from the school district here? Because having seen the school district have been running electric buses for quite some time, never had any feedback from them, not through direct gas, but how they found that experience, given they've certainly been running them through the 4 seasons. Sort of here now, unless they take them off the road in the winter, I don't know, but be interesting to know how they're doing with it.
I can certainly find out. I know that our team on the battery electric side, they have worked extensively with other jurisdictions. Mostly, I know I hear about a lot of it from other transit agencies. in different climates on their sort of lessons learned. I don't know if they have worked with school districts, let alone local school districts. So I suspect there hasn't been local connections made, but I can certainly follow up and see.
I'm just curious, does folks know they're running them around Nelson, because they're quite hard, well, yeah, there's quite a few on the road, it seems, around trail area.
SDA has a few of them.
Yeah.
And I know that there's some of the biggest, and not a BEV expert, in their sort of, I'd say, technology or how things are planned. So I don't know whether the types of vehicles are different enough. I know that one of the biggest things for deploying transit buses is that they do this 1-for-1 replacement. So a battery electric bus has to be able to replace a diesel bus and go the same distance and service that same time. So whether it's a 500-kilometer shift, the battery electric bus has to be able to do that. And I think with the school buses, because they're not doing 500 kilometers in between a charging opportunity, their challenges and opportunities, I suspect, are different, because they're working for an hour or two in the morning, and then they sit all day, and then they're potentially going out again. So I think their systems might be different, but certainly lessons learned, because they're dealing with the same climate and terrain that we'd be dealing with here.
And then, Jody, have you been talking to Scott at Nelson Hydro? Because it seems to me, I don't know if it's true if these buses are, if they're bi-directional, those big batteries might be of use to Nelson Hydro, and certainly worth exploring what kind of bi-directional charging we might have. And is that something you've talked to Scott about?
I haven't talked directly to Scott, no.
Okay.
But the discussion has been brought up. BC Transit is supplying their own charging station for these buses. There was discussion about the City of Nelson backing up on that project. There is going to be some advantages there, but we're not actually going to be using their chargers because BC Transit owns their asset, and we do not own that asset. So we can capitalize on some of the project itself, but not necessarily on the charger, on the asset itself.
Okay.
So a new dedicated utility service will be required to support charging infrastructure, and we have the Nelson Hydro work. So just the battery electric buses earn carbon credits for operating below greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and these carbon credits are monetized and act as a source of revenue. And the governments, the revenues are allocated to offset incremental operating expenses that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reducing costs further for local government partners. So BC Transit is leveraging federal and provincial funding sources to cover a lot of the capital costs, sort of upfront capital costs of installing these charging equipment, as well as being able to leverage this funding to keep vehicle lease fees the same as they would be for a new diesel bus. Battery electric buses are a lot more expensive to purchase than a diesel vehicle, and the idea is that we're leveraging other funding sources to be able to keep this a very attractive opportunity for local governments. So the expected kind of financial implication of all of this for Nelson is once they have 2 battery electric buses sort of fully in operation, replacing 2 diesel buses, it's expected to lower annual costs by about $15,000 a year. So things are positive. Mostly that's the trends, the sort of lower maintenance costs and transition from diesel fuel into electric fuel. So I'll switch gears a bit and We can talk a little bit more about the annual sort of transit improvement process. Also, as I mentioned, we're sort of in that general time of year again. When we start thinking about whether there is any need for future service improvements, particularly in the very short term, because timelines are long for implementing new service. So we do need to really be thinking ahead. If we just go back, the region of Kootenay Valley approved the 98 expansion in the fall of 2023, and it was just implemented a few months ago. So we're sort of planning now for new service potential sort of in 2027. So in general, the first priorities for investments are to address critical operational needs and capacity issues. I'd say local service is currently pretty well aligned with demand. So I wouldn't say that there's any sort of category 1 improvements recommended. At this time, any service improvements would fall into category 2 or 3. This would be increasing frequency for existing routes or potentially adding service to a new area. And I'll quickly run through what this TIPS planning cycle looks like. So it usually starts with conversations just like this, getting some costing estimates prepared by BC Transit and presented, working through this committee and local governments on anything that might be of particular interest to implement sort of immediately. BC Transit makes a submission to the province to seek their funding contribution, usually in about September, October, and then funding is secured sort of for budget day in February of 2026, and then we start planning for implementation. If no vehicles are needed to introduce the new service, we usually introduce it in sort of September of 2026, and then if we did need to wait for vehicles, right now we are estimating January 2027 for introducing the new service. I will mention that we are entering the 3rd year of a 3-year commitment from the province to fund expansions. So they have given us a pretty good signal of their, I'd say, expansion funding envelope that they are preparing for. Nothing is confirmed until budget day, but we do have, I'd say, sort of this projected 3-year funding agreement, and we are now going into year 3. So this doesn't mean that the province won't be funding expansion in the future. It just gives less certainty about what that funding envelope might look like. And we do continue to have challenges and long wait times for vehicles. So right now, our vehicle procurement is restricting most local government's ability to expand. So those resources are at times more restrictive than the actual projected funding. And that is it from me. So if there was anything you want to go back to or any questions about things in sort of general updates, be happy to go back to anything.
Okay. Not seeing anything.
Good. All right.
Thanks, Danica. Okay. Last chance for questions for Danica.
When I'm here, I'll order it. So.
Okay, last chance in this moment. Questions. Briar, we're going to you next.
Great. And so I'm going to have some slides that are coming up on the screen as well. Thank you so much for sharing for me. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the enrollment at Selkirk College. Oh, thanks so much. And get into a little bit about the discussions that we've had around UPass. It has been an incredibly transformational year for Selkirk College. there's a lot of good transformation that's happening, but there is a lot of sad, not happy things happening at Selkirk College right now. A lot of that is tied very closely to the federal changes on international students, and that being tied to the province's directives of us to continue to increase the number of international students we have in order to help balance the programming costs in order to provide the best possible programming to our domestic audience. So it gets really tricky because the province and the federal government are at odds with each other on the direction that they wanted to go, and unfortunately post-secondaries are paying the price. We also have in that same 3-year federal promise or provincial promise of funding, we're getting the messaging there's no help coming. And so that's something that's really important to know. As we go through this, it's an interesting time for post-secondary, but it doesn't mean that there's not optimism. There are opportunities for us. And so I'll go through a little bit of that for you today. Going to the next slide. Oh, this works really well. What we're covering today is I'll give you a quick Selkirk College Mythbuster. If anyone has any myths that they want to bust, I'm always open to an email. If you're like, oh, Selkirk College, they're always scheduling things at 8 a.m. Yes, we are, but that's because some of those programs are 8 hours for the whole day. So they work just the same way as a job. And so there's different things like that, and we can help sort of myth bust some of that stuff. But I'll just give you a basic. Talking about the 2024 transformations, talking a little bit about that bad news stuff that we were talking about. Going through our current projections for fall 2025, hopefully that will help a little bit with making the decisions that you need to going through the next year. And then I'm talking a little bit about the land, learning, and legacy. So what's next for Selkirk College? We just released our strategic plan, and I'll talk a little bit about that. If there's any questions at the end of that, I'm happy to accept questions, provided the chair is okay with that. So getting to Reno Selkirk College, one of the things that we learned through our strategic planning process is that we are not very good at tooting our own horn. We are a quiet background character in the West Kootenay region. We have, in 2024, we had 2,335 full-time enrollments. Of those, about 760 were international students and about 1,574 were domestic students. Currently, in this calendar year, Selkirk College has one of the highest enrollments we've had since 2018. So currently where we're sitting, and that actually going to your presentation means that those numbers sort of getting better is really beneficial because we do have quite a few students on campus right at the moment. We have amazing student outcomes. Our students are happy to be with us. Our numbers typically will end up in the 90s for engagement. And the average age of our student is a little bit older. We're not seeing a lot of those 18 to 24-year-olds at Selkirk College. We're seeing more students in the 22 to 30 range. And so that's something really interesting to know as well. People are coming back to school and they're choosing Selkirk College as their next path for their employment. Our revenue sources, a little bit there. Well, I'll go into regional impact first. 1 in 12 jobs in the region is supported by activities of Selkirk College. We want to see that number climb, obviously. We have $18 million in research and innovation activities that happen. So when we get those reports from Selkirk Innovates that say that we need more childcare, we need more this, we need more that, those are things that are happening through the college. They give us that oomph that we need to go to the province and get the things that we need for the West Kootenay region. And our revenue sources, we are supplemented by the government for about 55% in government grants. Our international tuition makes up about 14% of our overall operations. Domestic tuition is limited. It's only 7%. The cost of domestic tuition is monitored by the provincial government and is only able to increase by about 2% every year. You guys all know the cost of living has changed, so that's quite a bit lower than the actual cost of education. So it's really affordable for our domestic students to take education at Selkirk College. Contracts, skilled trades, and also donations. And we do pretty well on donations. So even though that's a small number, that on that last slide, that 0.31, that's our region is really supporting us, and we're really grateful for that. And then in 2024, the very first thing that sort of kicked it off was the relations with India deteriorated. The federal government, quite a number of years ago, put in place a visa program specifically for India, allowing Indian students to come over, study only for 2 years, and get something called a postgraduate work permit. And the postgraduate work permit is why you see so many Indian residents in this region, because once that program was put in place, the federal government got quite recruitment heavy, and those students came over from India in droves to take advantage of that deal. And so that was a deal that the federal government put in place. But when there were challenges with the relationship between India and Canada, that's when we first started seeing our India numbers drop. And with India being a primary market for so many colleges across Canada, that's where we started seeing some change. Then the postgraduate work permit limitations came into place. That is where the dramatic drop happened. We saw our applications actually deteriorate to 0 overnight. So typically where we would see 100, 200, 300 applications coming in the month, suddenly it was 0. And so it is not an insubstantial change. We also had our program approvals based on moved to be based on the federal labor market need. So that means that the federal government is now saying that if you need people in your region to fill the jobs that you need in your region, that needs to be based on what we need in Southern Ontario, because that's where most of the labor market information is from. So federal labor market is the entire country, and so that skews towards that urban, lower Ontario market. And so we don't see things like hospitality and tourism included in there. We don't see things like business administration, which you need in rural environments anywhere across the country. If you take a look at rural environment labor market needs, business administration is needed. The federal government's like, no, we got lots in Toronto, it's fine. So I have lots of feelings on this. You probably are picking up some of that through the presentation, but it is something really important to know, because this is something that impacts not just us, it impacts BC Transit, it impacts the region, it impacts municipalities. And then there's a mismatch with those provincial mandates that are required for institutions. The province is telling us, make sure that you're meeting your local labor market needs, make sure that you're creating programs, that your students are going to go out and get jobs directly in your region. And again, this goes back to the tourism. And that mismatch is happening right now because the federal government is saying, if you want to attract more students to your region, you need to make sure that you're aligning with the federal labor market. So it goes back to that same point. So we do have good news happening at the college right now, so I wanted to make sure that we highlight that. Our domestic applications are up 8.5%. That's absolutely fantastic. We've been doing a lot of work to try and attract students to the programs that we have. This is work that's been ongoing because we did see a dip in domestic enrollment. Part of that is just that the demographics are changing a little bit. One of the things to know is that we actually live in a region where a lot of people are highly educated, and that's really good. And so making sure that we have programs that bring people back to school, enhance what people have, is something that we're really interested in doing, because that's something that every person in this room, every person on the street should see themselves at Selkirk College. At least that's what we think at Selkirk College. So that's something that we're looking at. We're seeing increases in the regional program. We programs from domestic students, environmental and forestry, arts and culture, health programming, which we know we need more nurses, we need more doctors. Our rural pre-medicine program is absolutely booming right now. And then we're seeing a record number of students at convocation this year. We've got our highest convocation attendance ever. It's going to be about 505 students crossing the stage. And so that's happening on May 22nd, and we're really excited to be welcoming that many students that want to celebrate with us and cross that stage. Typically in a year we graduate about 800 to 900 students, but not everyone attends the convocation, but we're pretty excited about it. The bad news is that this year, and this is the numbers that are going to tie into that ridership, we're seeing about a 24% decrease in the total number of applications, 70% decrease in international student applications, and those international students are the ones that you see riding the bus the most often. 57% decrease in applications for hospitality and tourism, which is a regional need. A lot of those students are also traveling back and forth to their jobs, working on Baker Street, working in the Castlegar area, the Trail area. We know that this impacts our domestic programs too. So there are going to be domestic program changes on the college as well. When we say domestic programs, it's programs that mostly domestic students choose. And part of that is because the tuition legislation freezes where we can charge for tuition. We were using international tuition quite heavily to make sure that we were supplementing our programs so that we could be able to afford to run them. And unfortunately, that's a reality of rural colleges that isn't quite the same in the urban locations. And then we're anticipating about a 25% reduction in students for 2025 with a potential for 30 to 35% in 2026. Now, these numbers are realistic. What we did was we actually had several people at the college try and calculate them separately based on their area of expertise, bring those numbers together and see where we were situated. They are neither optimistic or pessimistic. So we feel very comfortable that our numbers are going to be fairly accurate. We have a fairly good idea that that 30 to 35 in fall 2026 is going to be legitimate. How many of those individuals were bus riders, we don't know. But I guess in good news as well is we have seen a reduction in complaints about transit. The bus changes have been absolutely fantastic. Our student union is thrilled. The complaints that they're getting are the normal complaints that you would get anywhere in Canada. It just the bus doesn't arrive exactly at the moment that your brain wants it to. And that is something that is never going to satisfy the average rider, right? It's not going to work like a car. So, oh yeah.
Through the chair, yeah, thank you. Two questions. So is that a cumulative close to 80% reduction in students from
No.
a year or so ago?
No, it will be, so it will be about 25% less in the fall 2025 year. So not cumulative. And then 30 to 35 will not be on top of the 25. So from this particular year, we're looking at about 30 to 35 reduction. We do have some actions in place to be able to try and mitigate some of the changes. So we're hoping that we can, where we're losing, we can grow in other areas.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the page. I didn't butcher the name of this program, but I'm curious about the alignment with the replacement for ARIA, which I believe is now called the Community Oriented Immigration Program.
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
Yeah, we're actually seeing a little bit of, that actually helps our numbers quite a bit. So initially before we were approved for that, we actually looked at, we were looking at our numbers and potentially looking at a reduction of about 40 to 50%. With the rural immigration program that's in place, Selkirk College has been selected for that.
Right.
Really good news because some other colleges haven't. College of the Rockies was not selected. They were very vocal about that in their newspaper, but some other colleges around the province have too. We've been partnering with Northern Lights a lot to go out to different locations to encourage people to come in for that. But at this point in time, the programs aren't quite selected. We're not quite ready to announce. So it's slow. It's slow advertisement, but we're hoping that will help with the rebound, and we're really hoping it will help with our hospitality and tourism programming.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So what's next for Selkirk College? We are moving into a new strategic plan. This is something that we were engaged in when the federal announcement changes happened. But our focus is on 4 very specific areas, which are sustainability. That translates to 7 generations and beyond. We don't want to just be sustainable for our future that we can see. We want to be sustainable for the future we can't see yet. Focus, transformative, distinctive education. Delivering a high performance, high support organization. So making sure that we are really integrated in the community. You can see us in you. We can see us in the work that you guys do. Impact, innovation, thriving communities. That's that research component, making sure that we're continuing to support the place that we are, because we are, at the end of the day, a community college. community colleges have the distinct advantage of being part of the community, working with the community, and helping support that community. So, through the new strategic plan, UPass fits literally everything. It is a sustainable initiative, it's high performance, it's innovation and thriving, it's can help us build a thriving community. And so we have been talking to the Selkirk College Student Union. The Selkirk, any fees, any mandatory fees, which UPass would be, are required to be voted on by referendum by the student body. So the student union would take that to their membership in order to vote on whether the students feel comfortable with moving forward with a UPass or not. With the student union, we've talked to them, we've let them know about the conversations that we've been having, the optimism that we have that this might be a positive change. Well, for sustainability, it might not be that everyone's riding the bus right now, but could more people ride the bus? Could there be more opportunity, more potential? Some of our initial cost analysis shows that maybe there could be a revenue loss. So this is something that has to be looked at very carefully on both sides. It might not be more, having the students all buy into the UPass might not mean more money for the West Kootenay region transit. So that's something that's really important to take a look at. But the student union's keen on the environmental impacts. There's still a lot of negativity around students using the buses and the bus schedule. We've seen that decrease this year, but it's that memory of those years that weren't quite where we wanted them to be that's sort of lingering. In conversations around the UPass, we've been talking about pushing it off until next year's referendum, and actually that seems to be one of the best decisions that any of us ever made. Just because the student union feels that that's going to allow for people who are having a great experience this year to really remember that and share that with other riders. So there's a lot of positivity around the UPass. Long and short of it is that it has to go to referendum because we're offering it. So if it's being offered, it's not a monarchy, it's a democracy, student union. So they need to make sure that they're bringing that to their student body, and then the students would vote on it. So we just want to make sure that we're continuing that trend of positivity around the transit and making sure that we are allowing our students to see the value in something like a UPass situation. So that's it. That's all my presentation, but I am happy to answer any questions. Not sure how to read the room.
So from a West Kootenay Transit perspective, or perspective through the chair, from a West Kootenay Transit perspective, we can't really make any changes for 2025 at this point.
Yeah.
The wheels of government are slow and relentless. It's hard to turn the ship. Any changes that we wanted to make, we would have to make decisions now for 2026, 2027, right? I guess that's what I'm saying. Do you have any projections, or does Selkirk College have any projections more aligned with, say, a 5 or 10 year? Because when we're looking at transit systems, that's actually how we think. I mean, it's useful to have numbers for next year, but it's not like we're going to reduce or increase services for next year. We can't actually do that. It takes a year and a half, right? So if we had 5 or 10 year numbers so that we could sort of look down the road and say like, oh yeah, no, you're looking at bringing it back up to 2019 levels, or you're looking at changing these programs, or you're looking at these big strategic moves. We're going to go all night classes or whatever. At that point, then we can tailor a transit system to work with that. So I guess that's my first point. My second point is that the West Transit Services Committee, who are made up of the elected officials that represent participants from the RDCK that fund West Kootenay Transit, are recently engaged in an exercise around the establishment of transit values. Why are we doing this? One of those key values that came up was that identified transit as a social service, right? And as a part of social services, getting students to school is a thing. For all the reasons that you pointed out. So, as we move forward, and as we talk about the 5 and 10 year vision, right, and tying into the values of the people that actually fund transit, I think you could build a bridge to a better future using those tools.
Yeah, I didn't comment, not a lot of comment to the second point because, yeah, perfect alignment. On the first point, looking ahead 5 to 10 years at the moment, just given what has happened in the last year is very tricky. We have a lot of mechanisms by which we would predict out, and a lot of those mechanisms are now broken, which is causing some challenges. I think at this point, we would like to get to about 2,000 FTEs. One of the things that's interesting is that FTEs translate differently for service, right? Headcount is much more reliable, and so for headcount, we'd be looking at about 3,500 over the course of the year. That would be where we would like to be sustainable and structurally stable enough so that we can dream big, we can dream of the future in a much more productive way. Those numbers are going to be more developed over the next coming year because we're engaged in a strategic enrollment plan. So our strategic enrollment plan was delayed by a year just given the situation that we were in. And so that will be coming out at the end of this month. And then a strategic enrollment response team is going to work on developing what our goals are for enrollment more structurally over the next 5 to 10 years. We'd like to see growth for about 3% year over year. And that's something that we're hoping to do over the next 5 years. Over the next 10 years, it depends on what data we're seeing in that 5-year period. So we do have a lot of opportunity to be able to dig into that 5 to 10 year plan. It's just that this year really just threw us off our feet. If I did write most of the strategic enrollment plan prior to the federal government announcement, which is the tragedy of my life. It was very disappointing for me. And so all of that data unfortunately got dismantled. But that's it was really powerful as well because we could see exactly how the data got dismantled. And so that's a learning lesson as well. So it's worthwhile. But yeah, I definitely we can help out with that. And anytime you want to invite me back, we can do these presentations every single year if you'd like. So yeah, we'll get better at knowing exactly what types of things you want to see in those presentations.
Jerry? Chair, thank you. Just curious on the housing development that went on over the last few years, both Southern College locations. I understand Nelson's is completed. Lots of rumors about Castlegar, whether it's completely, the project is completed or not. Is that an impact that you've looked at as far as transit goes? Are you now able to house students locally rather than having them travel? And then what did that look like in your study?
Yeah, absolutely. So our housing opened on both campuses and was available for student body starting in fall of 2024. So we did move new students into the new housing project in Castlegar. We have students living in Nelson. Nelson opened a little bit earlier, just because Castlegar had a little bit of a oops. But with both of those projects, we are seeing a lot of uptake on living on campus. There are still a lot of students that prefer to live in community, and partially because they are working more than they're attending school. And so what that means is they prefer to be close to their workplace and then commute to school because the bus routes support that. That is at least the subjective, not objective information that we've received from the student body when we've talked to the student union. With the housing, we actually have rooms available. So that's something that is different. We are anticipating that we will have availability of rooms next year as well. Specifically because the major decrease in international students will happen between this year and the beginning of next year. So moving forward, we do think that we'll have quite good availability, and yes, I do anticipate that should impact transit a little bit, but not so much in ridership, but more in the way that students use. They wouldn't necessarily be commuting to school for classes, but they'd be commuting to communities, especially in Castlegar where you're sort of on your own private island and you need to be able to escape. I think something like a pedestrian bridge, which everyone is hoping for in Castlegar, at some point, every time I bring it up, it turns into a thing. So I don't actually think it's going to happen or not happen. I'm neutral on this. But a pedestrian bridge might impact even more, just because that would provide that walking component for the students to be able to access jobs.
Respectfully to the chair, and that's like the other key piece is not just how many students, where are the students?
Yeah.
And is there any way for us to access information as to where the students are? where are they choosing to live, right? Because we're in a very reactionary mode around that right now. Like we find out, oh, wait a minute, most of the students went to Trail this year because housing was more affordable than Trail. But we find out after the fact, we spend a year and a half planning around trying to get an extra 98 down there, and then the student enrollment changes.
Yeah, and unfortunately for components like that, we are in the same boat.
Okay.
So the students are arriving at the beginning of August, it's where the rentals are located. I think probably some predictive planning could happen in the way of like seeing where the rentals are located and where the costing is. And that's not something that we would naturally do on our end, because if they're coming to class and they're happy and they're situated, that's great. We can provide the number of beds that we do have in housing, what our housing is looking like. Those are numbers that we can provide, but typically those numbers aren't cemented until about July 1st. But yeah, at any point you can send an email and we can give you what we have for sure.
Respectfully through the chair, that sounds like something for a planning department.
James?
Yeah, just further to that is that, excuse me, that planning ahead that would look at where the programs will be considered to be expanded. Obviously, you can't tell what enrollment is going to be like, but are there more expansions in the programs that are being run from Trail or Nelson, as an example, over the next, because as Tom said, we're planning 2 or 3 years ahead. So in 3 years' time, the strategic plan is Selco hoping to grow courses that are currently offered in Trail or is it in Nelson, because then that's going to drive potential demand, although you'll never know until September whether it's there. So in addition to the housing needs, if services potentially might grow in the Trail area by 20 or 30%, that has potential to influence.
Yes, that's a really big, it's really important. At this point in time, just to be completely realistic with the committee, we're in retraction. We're not in a position financially to consider growth at this point in time. There will be new programs that will appear, but they will be replacing what we already have. It won't be more. And we should be on the path to stability for the next 5 years is absolutely the path that we're on right at the moment.
All right, seeing no more questions, Barb, thank you for that.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and you're welcome back, of course, anytime.
Thanks.
Okay, we're moving to some new business, and Danica and Tom, you're going to tell us about the transit fare review coming out of the RDCK.
Tom, you want to take the lead or go to
I can give the quick summary of how we got here.
Sure.
And then you can give a quick thing of where we're going. Okay. We had a meeting of the West Transit Services Committee, which, as I said previously, is made up of elected officials, of the participants of West Kootenay Transit, from the RDCK board, so our funding services on the RDCK side, and based on some advice that we've seen, and also some challenges in funding public transit. It's very expensive. One of the values that we arrived at when we did our value study was user pays. So that triggered a request for a fare review, understanding, of course, that I think there are 20 some odd different systems in the queue right now for a fare review. I imagine a lot of other BC Transit systems are in a similar position. We submitted that request to BC Transit, and that's where you go like, yeah, that's where we are now.
That's where we are now. So, you might recall, so back during the pandemic when obviously revenues from transit fares really decreased, the province kicked in some additional funding to also contribute to that loss in revenue that local governments were getting. And with that funding came the agreement that local government increase fares until April of 2025. So for now. So there's been I'd say a fair amount of pent-up interest and demand from various local governments across the province to now review and increase fares. A lot of that is, because they weren't able to for several years. We're still, there was this focus on encouraging riders to come back to transit. And also we've seen some changes in the cost of operating transit. So now there's definitely a lot more interest. For most systems, transit fares have been very stable for a very long time. And there's interest in looking at that. So we do have, I'll say 1.5 FTEs at BC Transit who is dedicated to doing fare reviews. And there is, there's several sort of systems in the queue. So right now, this wouldn't be something that will be able to start right away, but potentially closer to the end of the year. And what they would be doing is reviewing the fares for the West Kootenay Transit system. So all of the fares, conventional, concession, handy dart, Aero Transit, the types of fare products, whether that is sort of a good mix, the individual sort of fares, and then making some recommendations based on other jurisdictions, sort of where typical fares fall for other sort of similar type systems. The longer we go on, the more that shifts, because we are starting to introduce fare increases in other systems. There's been quite a few already from local governments who were very keen. So we've seen fare increases in Victoria, in Nanaimo. I think Kelowna is sort of going through or wrapping up their public engagement on fares. Kamloops just finished a quick public engagement on fare increases as well. So there's sort of that momentum is starting, and I think as we continue over the next year, we'll see quite a few other systems either engage the public if they want, or just implement fare increases as well. So what that means, I think, for this committee is obviously there's 3 local government partners that all need to sort of come to agreement on what fares are for the West Kootenay Transit system. Certainly, from BC Transit's perspective, we want to make sure that there is support from all local government partners before there's a big investment of resources put into doing a fare review. Because we would have to make sure that all partners were at least interested in having that review done, and the potential, likelihood of being, given a couple different options for how we might want to increase fares. And for the most part, we're talking, 25 cents on a sort of like single use sort of day pass. So not huge increases. Fare increases do typically increase your revenue. They also come with a change in ridership behavior. You lose some riders. Some riders switch from, maybe single use or cash fares. They switch to a more economical fare product like a monthly pass. So I'd say a sort of complicated estimation of how revenue and ridership will respond to a change in fares. And typically the fare review comes out with, a couple recommendations. Some might be like a one-time fare increase, or it might be, hey, let's increase, fares every 2 years a little bit and get out a bit of a 5-year plan for how you might increase them a little bit and, give the rider a bit of, relief, and then also get them into the habit of expecting that transit fares will increase, just like so many other services that they're familiar with. So I think today's sort of just looking for some, general feedback. If there was some, support for that from our other local government partners, or some, resistance to examining fares, certainly want to hear that before, BC Transit launches into this fare review, because it isn't something we can sort of just do for the regional district of Central Kootenay. We sort of have to do it on behalf of the whole transit system.
Okay, we're going to go to questions. Walter, you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I fully understood what you were trying to, the message that you're conveying to us, but I got a couple of questions. One is, are conventional fairs tied to the City of Vancouver fairs? I was in Vancouver, and it seems like the fair here is the same as it is in Vancouver.
So respectfully through the chairs, the fairs are not, I'd say sort of related to the fairs in Vancouver. Local governments for each transit system set the fares. So for the West Kootenay transit system, the price of a transit ticket is determined by this committee sort of making a recommendation. So it's by the Regional District of Central Kootenay, the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary, and the City of Nelson that have the authority to set the fares for the West Kootenay transit system. And typically, BC Transit is quite involved in making recommendations based on what those fares might be, based on other jurisdictions and, other transit systems. So I'd say it's really not a coincidence that, transit costs or, a ticket in Vancouver might be the same as it is here. But they certainly don't have to be the same.
Yeah, supplemental if I may through the chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to make sure that I understand and the committee understands that once we do the review and we come back with a substantial increase in the fares, does BC Transit has a say in what our increase should be?
And respectfully to the chair, BC Transit's role, because we have this sort of in-house experts, would be to give you the information and recommendations so that you can make informed decisions. But BC Transit will implement a fare increase, but it is up to local governments who have the authority to set fares and to change fares.
Okay, thank you.
And further to that, I think you mentioned substantial fare increases. What we've been seeing and trying to balance things like affordability, ridership retention, and revenue. The fare increase recommendations that have been made to other systems, I'd say are quite minor. They're the equivalent of 25 cents on a sort of single transit ticket or maybe $10 on a monthly pass. So we're not, I guess it's debatable whether that's significant for most folks, but typically you'd be presented with 3 recommendations for very nominal to more aggressive price increases that might be a 50-cent increase. But if you're looking at cost increase in terms of percentage, I know that can seem quite substantial. So we'd be presenting information and recommendations, and then it would be up to the local governments to make decisions.
Okay. We'll go to Director Lockwood and then Director Worley.
Thank you. So I just want to, because I'm a little confused with what we hear to what is being said and kind of all. So I just want to clarify the whole thing because I'm really having a tough time with what people pay for fares when we can't fill those buses. So it's obviously not the driving factor for people. Is that cheap fare. So they're staying in their vehicles for a reason. So BC Transit would do the fare review, give back to us local government. The 3 local governments have to come up with the yes or no. But BC Transit would probably, if they did recommend an increase of approximately 25 cents only.
Typically, that's what I've been seeing. And you don't need a fare review in order to direct BC Transit to change fare. That's not necessary.
Okay, that was my next thing.
It's not at all necessary. It just gives you more information, and depending on if there is interest, typically our fare reviews can involve public engagement.
Okay, what about adding zones? So when you go to Vancouver, as Walter said, you want to go from this to this, where, is there any way in the system that's here that we have, if I'm in Nelson and I only want to go 4 blocks, I don't want to pay the same as if I'm in Salmo and needing to get to Nelson. So is there a way of actually implementing in the system that we have here, a zone system?
Through the chair, I think there probably is. I'm not 100% sure how that works with UMO. But in general, we want to encourage people to ride more and move them towards something to a monthly pass. And want to simplify transit fares and the options for transit fare products. So it is a trade-off of if you're introducing zones, you're introducing the complexity, you're increasing the complexity, you're increasing the, I'd say, interpretation that people have to make. Maybe that might change whether they are more likely or less likely to get like just a monthly pass and then they get to do whatever they want, and they don't have to, think about where they're going. So it's certainly something that if there was interest, we could ask the fare review team to consider things like whether a zone system might work well in this area. And that's something they could consider and then provide sort of some information with the report on what that might look like or what the costs might be, or whether it will even, I don't feel confident speaking to that right now.
So if I may, just on that, if we're talking about monthly passes, does the Lower Mainland not use monthly passes?
Yes, they do. And so there are 30-day passes now with you, not monthly passes. I'll correct myself. 30-day passes. Yes, I believe Translate. I know Translate has monthly passes.
So it's already in the system of how it works. If somebody
Translate is entirely different than BC Transit. They have a different electric fare, and they are. We have nothing to do with them. We learn a lot from them, but. It might be possible with because they have a compass. We have UMO. I don't know how similar the two are.
Thank you.
Director Worley?
Yes, so thank you, and through the chair, and thank you, Director Lockwood, for your clarifications on a few points. But my question would be, we are a regional service, and you did mention there's 3 participants in this. And I'm wondering when you say that you would review like systems, how like are the systems to ours in actual population? Because if you put the 3 regional districts together, you put the ridership, encompass the who's in that web and each one that would get ridership privileges or have buses actually going to areas. How would that population compare to anything else in the province? Because this is a basically rural municipality, small municipalities, rural system that takes in some electoral areas as well, but not all. So how would it compare, and how could you make that projection for a suggestion is it based on population? Is it based on the numbers, percentages within a ridership, which wouldn't be an equal way to do it, because percentages, maybe we have 50%, let's say, and maybe a large municipality at the coast or Kamloops or Kelowna or whatever would have the same 50%, but it's not based on the same numbers. It's not based on the same population, the same number of actual riderships, people that are actually riding these buses. So it would be based on a percentage of ridership. So I'm having difficulty understanding how a comparison could be made when the numbers, it's not equitable. It's not, in my view, or it can't really be determined as being because I think we're probably one of the smaller regional systems, or a smaller system, if you will, that would actually exist. So if you can help me out.
Share they definitely wouldn't go into that much detail to find another perfectly comparable system, but I don't think transit fares have to be that closely aligned. I mean, we're looking at making some recommendations based off of what other areas are doing to make sure that you're not, charging $5 where someone else is charging $1. Or, if you are charging $1, like I think in Preston, we're charging $1. Maybe bringing them up a little bit so that it is more aligned with other, rural areas. So just keeping everyone sort of a little bit more aligned, because transit fares are all over the place. And every system is different, and in here you do have trips of very different lengths. So yeah, I guess to sum it up, it's not going to be a perfect comparison. It would just be looking at other rural systems. So looking at maybe the East Kootenays, because there's a lot of, Cranbrook and trips from Invermere and Fernie. Looking at some other systems like that, or some other systems in the Okanagan, or up in the north that do have some regional connectivity to smaller systems.
Thank you.
James, Tom might have been. James.
Respectfully through the chair, some of the background on how this conversation around fare review really got started, and what we've noticed is there's been a significant increase in the cost of public transit. Tires just cost more, buses just cost more, the provision of service just costs more now, but fares have not changed. And that was a concern of some of the elected officials at the table. They wanted to make sure, not necessarily that, I'll put a number on it, 25%. So we've seen a 25% increase over the last 4 years. They didn't want to see fares necessarily increase lockstep, but there has to be some increase at some point in time to reflect the increase in operating costs and general inflation. Everything just costs more year over year. Now, having identified transit as a social service, there's a very clear understanding that we're trying to provide transit services to the highest barrier populations and people who generally don't have other transit or mobility options. So it's not to exclude anybody from the system, but it is to ensure the sustainability of the system. So, where we land in terms of a transit fare review is ultimately, to be considered by the elected officials who participate in the West Kootenay Transit Service. That will be the decision of this committee, ultimately. BC Transit is there to make recommendations. I strongly recommend a public participation process, giving the public the chance to weigh in on what they feel like transit should cost, and then balancing that with the operational realities of transit. So, the elected officials being representative of the taxpayer. So we have a tension that exists between the ridership and the taxpayer as to who is paying how much of the public transit cost. And various elected officials will be able to contribute various things in that regard. The other piece that I wanted to bring up, and particularly around zones, West Kootenay Transit is unique. I've said that a lot. I'll say it again. And what makes West Kootenay Transit very unique is we have very different types of transit happening. So we have urban transit happening in Trail, Castlegar, and Nelson. And then we have big inter-community transit happening on the 99 and the 98. This constant back and forth. I would throw the 10 into that and likely the 20. And then we have small rural community transit happening in the more remote areas of the regional district. And we also have health connections happening. And the question that a lot of elected officials had was, should all these different kinds of services ultimately cost the same? Generally, local government does not look at things like that. When you go to the pool, Are you paying for the pool and the rink? Are you paying for a class? Are you paying for different types of services in a different fashion? With the UMO system, can we charge a different amount for small local urban transit than we do for large interregional services versus far-flung areas? Because the reality, the impact to the ridership is that person who is riding the Argenta bus, which only operates once a week, if it goes from $2.25 to $3, they're only going to pay that extra 75 cents once a week, right? Whereas a significant increase in the municipal areas could have a profound impact on somebody's budget. It could cost them an extra $1 a day, right? Because people use those services a great deal more. We're probably getting into the weeds of a fare review, but I think at the time of fare review, what I had heard from elected officials is they would like some consideration to that. Is it possible to do this?
Okay, James, and then we'll see if there's somebody who wants to move the motion.
Yeah, thank you through the chair, and this was discussed with our directors committee around just the cost and the level. So I appreciate the conversation. I agree with as Tom's point that he wrapped up that costs have increased as we all know, and there's been no fare adjustment. Speaking, I guess, the conversation I've heard at sort of our table, I'd say it's more kind of higher level, but there, like, do we want to do that? And again, if there's interest as a whole, I think that's something we have to address first, and with our committee, Rob, before we sort of get into the details, of the fare review, that whole philosophy of do we think, users should pay? And then I think there is an element of simplicity of then increasing things to keep up. We haven't had any increases. Costs have gone up, whether it's 25%, 35%, and therefore we should consider the principles of increasing fares. To that, I'm not sure how interested our table will be going into the minutiae and the detail. More just looking for high level recommendations. But I'd be certainly happy to take this discussion back to our elected officials that are here today, and I think that's important. The other one I think stands out is getting some. I don't know if this goes into the fare review, but if you could imagine like the 25 cents being some of the reasonable recommendations that we hear that are happening in the province, what's that really going to do to our revenues? Where we're going to see that? Because you can do a lot of this work, and then if you go, well, if that's going to bring in a small amount or a larger amount, then I think that also has a bearing on the conversation, right? We're looking at substantial increases in things that we're doing, and if their revenue is going to bring on cover 2-3% of that, how much work do we want to delve into in the details of fare review for maybe a modest gain? So definitely it's on the radar for our elected folks. I think we're happy to support looking into the process, and perhaps the first step is getting consent from the three parties to the detail of looking to a fare review.
Okay, so if we're going to get into debate, I want to get
It's not a debate.
clarification. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to clarify. You both said the fare reviews have stayed the same. Salmo used to pay $3.50, and I was good with that, and we're down to $2.25. So we've actually gone downwards instead of upwards. And that's something that I have said right from the day that, like for quite a few years now, is why is the fare review fares going down instead of, because nothing, any other price is going down, right? So I don't, because I'm sure that this is being recorded or it will be reported out that the fare reviews have stayed the same. They've actually gone down, and the public needs to understand that we were at that point at one point, and we've actually increased transit. We haven't decreased transit. In most of the transit, we've actually increased the times that I know that Salmo used to get it once a week, and now we get it 3 times a week, 3 times a day. So I just want to clarify that. The other thing I wanted to ask is when we go to public, if we do a public engagement, how do we, and this is clarification that I need from maybe Danica, is how do we find out if we're hearing from, we got two people sitting in the room, I don't use transit, but I'm a taxpayer, he uses transit and also is a taxpayer, he doesn't want it, he doesn't want the increase, I do want the increase, how does that get weighed out in public engagement?
I'll take that. So through the chair, whether public engagement happens or not would certainly be a decision of the local government partner. So it's not a requirement. We've seen both of most of the bigger systems that have gone through a fair review have opted to engage with the community. And we've all been interested in getting different, I'd say, types of information out. And a lot of the benefits of a public engagement is to inform the public about how their transit system currently works, how it's funded, generally increase, I'd say, the sort of transit literacy and to raise awareness about transit. So I often think that that is the biggest benefit of doing public engagement. You're also giving them an opportunity to, identify whether some of these fare increases, might really stretch them or whether they'd be really supportive of it. And again, it's not a consultation, it's just public engagement. So we're not looking to have the public sort of 100% all be on board. We're definitely going to get different perspectives. And depending on how you launch a public engagement, you can certainly influence whether you're getting more feedback from your existing transit users or whether you're getting more feedback from the general sort of public who might be more non-transit users and it's more your taxpayer base. And that can all be worked through depending on what the group is interested in. If and when we go ahead with this fair review, that the engagement part and I'd say the sort of strategy behind the public engagement would all be worked through this committee.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got Director Main, but Director Main, before you go, I just want to clarify that you're just asking for clarification. Before we get into debate, I'd love a motion to be on the floor. So is it a question for clarification? Or?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to move the recommendation so that we could engage in formal debate about it. And I'll preface that by saying, I think it's critical to have a fair review and that it include public engagement. So I will move the recommendation that the West Kootenay Transit Committee request BC Transit to initiate a fair review of the entire West Kootenay transit system and report back to the committee with recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second? Director Popoff, second. Okay, so it's now on the floor. Director Main, would you like to have the first go?
Sure. Thank you. My question, first question would be, is public engagement automatically part of the fair review, or would we have to make that as a second motion to request that?
Madam Chair, it does not have to be part of the fair review, and if you wanted to either sort of park that decision until we're closer to implementing a fair review, or if you wanted to make that decision now, it would certainly help our team sort of planning for the scope of the West Kootenay Transit fair review. It would certainly help them to know if there was definitely consensus that they would include public engagement. I'll maybe leave that to the group.
James?
If I may, thank you through the chair. I think another an important part will be for this committee is to consider actually asking support from each of the three members as well. And then that might be specific with public engagement. I do believe each local government would probably has their own approach to public engagement that might differ slightly. We've all gone through our own sort of experiences, so that I think might be useful to get that feedback initially from each sort of partner to come back before we went too much into the detail of the actual fare review or anything else, and then we could take that back to BC Transit with hopefully a consensus from all three at the table, as Danica explained. It's they'd be looking for that direction, and I wouldn't want to find kind of three different voices and wanting three different things. So perhaps then that next step is for each of us to take it back to our committees, boards as needed, and then come back.
So what I'm hearing is that this is a significant enough request that you're recommending that if we pass this resolution, that would not be enough to trigger a service review, that we would expect that the three partners would also be required to pass that. And there's two ways to do that. One, we can include in this resolution or a second resolution to then ask the respective partners to do it. That's one approach. Or the second approach is that we just leave it in your hands, Danica, to approach each partner directly. I suspect the first approach is probably the better approach. Councillor Page, you have...
Sorry, guys, we're not always in the committee today.
Just to be clear, Councillor Page, before, because then I'll have to go through a process of asking the committee to give you the privilege of the floor. If it's a question of clarification.
It's a comment.
I don't think I can allow the comment. Unless there's one of the directors would like to.
I'll make a motion to give him further move forward.
Okay, can I get a second on that? I think that's Mary McFadden.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor of giving, and that carries, so go ahead.
Thanks. I'm really interested in what James is saying here. It reminds me a lot of what we do in recreation. And so there's almost, and I think we've had this maybe conversation, maybe just not surfacing here, is that middle step of coming up with a memorandum of understanding around the values underneath the fees and charges, right? When we're in recreation, we provide a 75% subsidy to youth nonprofits to do their work, and those values are laid down in policy work and fees and charges bylaw, so that the staff comes to take those operational costs and determine fares. That framework exists and has been approved by the partners because the partners have come together. So in initiating this fare review, which will come months down the road, it feels to me there's a middle piece here that James is touching on about how you guys go a bit deeper amongst all the partners to hammer out what those social values are and why we subsidize this group versus that group versus this cost versus that cost. And having laid down that work and agreed to it ahead of time, we'll lay the foundation so you're not working from a number back. You're not like 25 cents. Why 25 cents? No, maybe 50 feels better. Why 50 cents? But instead working from, you support seniors who no longer have mobility opportunities because they can't drive anymore. We support school-aged children because those connect our communities. We support the connections to communities because those keep the Kootenays vibrant. And then that allows you and allows staff in the future to put forward optional fares in 5 and 10 year increments because they're being driven by operational costs plus that layer of values. Because I'm hearing a lot of the opposite. So I feel like there might be a middle step there that will take a little bit of work on the local government side, but will bring clarity over the next decade.
Thank you.
Decade.
Well, that's, so Director Page, thank you for that. Danica, clarification for you. In the service or in the fare review process, I imagine that there's some question about, as Director Page, but the values, like what are you trying to optimize for? Or is it purely technical? Is it, if we raise by 25%, we'll see X amount decline in ridership and the net effect in terms of revenue generated would be Y? Is it purely technical that way, or does it encompass sort of broader questions around values? What are you trying to maximize?
There can be there's often some engagement with local governments, with elected officials about what their values are, so that that can be built into the revenue and ridership sort of estimates for different fare scenarios. And so if if they're hearing, well, the cost recovery is our biggest objective, then they'll develop options with that in mind. If the value that they're hearing is one of social service and maintaining affordability, then the options and the sort of analysis that they'll run will have those values in mind. But those really have to come from elected, official and local governments. I'd say the default is trying to balance increasing costs with affordability, and to have that sort of middle ground of we're not going to chase huge cost recovery. We're going to maybe get the public used to the idea of regular fare increases through 25 cents this year, another 25 cents in 2 years, trying to maintain affordability, particularly by keeping things like monthly passes, the change on that, less significant than on, single-use fares. And so I'd say that's the default approach that BC Transit would take in the absence of specific, values or objectives that local governments put forward that can sort of help the fare review team refine their analysis and their options.
So to Councillor Page's point, it seems like there's some work that we need to do to establish some of those values. Otherwise, if we just recommend a service review or a fare review, you're going to come back to us anyways, maybe in a bit of an ad hoc way, try to get some of those values from us, and then optimize for whatever you can glean from that. As opposed to what Director Councillor Page is recommending is something where we establish what are we trying to do? Why do we believe this system exists? And that's, to me, that seems like work that is generational. It is something that we then go on to inform BC Transit on an ongoing basis for years to come. So what I'm then looking for, and I guess this would go back to the mover, Director Main, do you want to modify your motion to provide further guidance in that respect? Or is there anyone else who hearing that argument wants to make any sort of...
If I could respond, I think what my preference would be to vote on the motion as made, and then someone can make a second motion, sort of clarifying what it is that we are looking for in that fare review.
Okay.
But I would like to just, get that process started first.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? Nope, seeing none. Okay, well, I'll then make a comment on the motion as moved. There's a couple of things that I'm cautious about in terms of a fair review, going straight to fair review. Number one is, I do think that foundational work, as Councillor Page has said, is important. It's going to be required anyways. And if we just go direct to a fair review, it's probably not going to be done to our satisfaction. It might raise more questions, or it might select to a few people that aren't representative of the region as a whole. And so I think there is an argument to be made that we should do that work first. The second thing, I don't think, as James has said, we can move something like this, because it does have pretty significant implications for the partners, without the partners having a chance to weigh in. So I would be looking for that too. Director McFadden, I think you've got a question or comment.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, trying my mute button. Yeah, through the chair, I guess I'm trying to navigate a couple pieces of being good stewards of taxpayers' money and staff time. And so a bit trying to understand how it fits in the work that we've already done at the RDCK around values. So part of what you're asking for already, the RDCK side, we've already done pretty extensive work around that. So what does that look like? First of all, on the RDCK side, does that mean that the residents that City of Kaskar or RDCK who have already done this work are going to have to pay to do it again to figure out what our values are when we already did that? Second piece would be, is there a different costing from BC Transit side when we're asking for a fare review that we're going to pick up the cost for at different levels? So if you have this much engagement around public engagement, it's going to cost you this. If we're just doing it without public engagement, it's going to cost you this. If it's, I hope you understand what I'm saying, like the layers to what a fare review would be. Is there a cost implication to us as a region for the degree of fare review we're looking for? That would be my two questions. Hopefully they were clear. If not, I can clarify.
Well, one of them for sure was clear, which is what the cost is for the various options of the fare review. The second was related to the values of the RDCK has already done it. Is that not good enough for the rest of us? Is that, did I capture that? Okay.
Well,
So
I may not be, I guess, it may not be good enough for the rest of everyone. I just want to make sure that the RDCK side, that we're not using our staff time and our taxpayer money to do work that we've already done. If we can just hand that off and say, we've already done our values. If the rest of the system wants to do it, then they can figure out how to fund that and do that work. But we've already done ours. That's more what my concern is that we would end up having to do it again.
Yeah, fair enough. Danica, do you want to respond to the cost question?
Sure. So through the chair, there aren't any incremental costs for doing the fare review. We are a shared services, I guess, funding model. So sort of built into each of the local government sort of budgets to have, resources like me available to you, resources from BC Transit's different program areas available to you in a shared sort of way. So there aren't any specific costs. Each local government does have a particular, they say, like marketing budget, and sometimes depending on what you wanted for a public engagement, if you did want, BC Transit to be doing a lot of bigger, splashier, things for something like a public engagement that maybe wasn't budgeted for, you might see some changes to, your marketing budget if you wanted to do a lot of, print material or banners or pop-up events with, radio and, pushed advertising for something like that. But, we're talking maybe hundreds or thousands of dollars or something. So in general, I'd say these kind of services are built into your budget as a resource that you get from BC Transit.
Okay. Yeah, Tom?
Respectfully through the chair, and potentially one thing to consider too here is to sort of look at the BC Transit fare review as a technical review. BC Transit is going to present the elected officials with a range of fares that are like from a low side to a high side, okay? And simultaneously, the elected officials could be working towards values to apply to that range of fares. So that when the options are presented to the elected officials then have their values or the values of the organizations that they represent to apply to that range of what is possible, right? And that allows these two processes to actually run concurrently. My concern as staff is that if we defer the initiation of the fare review process, there's enough demand in the province right now that it might kick this down the road a considerable way, when in fact we can be working on these two processes in tandem.
Well, thank you for that, Tom. And what I would say then in that case then maybe it's not as urgent to go to the respective partners, because if it were a technical review, the respective partners would have ample opportunity to weigh in after the fact. So we wouldn't have to further delay or burden the process. Having said that, what I would be expecting from this service review is that the technical review of it would say, if you increased fares by this much, this is what we suspect what impact it would have on revenue. And therefore that the range might even be negative. The recommendation coming back would be, actually, we recommend you decrease, because there's a potential by decreasing revenue, you'll get further ridership and overall net increase in ridership. So I just want to be clear in setting the Overton window here. We want a full range, looking at it from a technical perspective, because the values question, which you did say the fare review does consider the values in it. Well, that's something we can do on our own. We don't need that from this sort of review. I wouldn't want to muddy the waters. I would love to get back. Tell me what a fare increase or decrease or a big increase will have on revenue, ridership and revenue, and that I'd limit it to that. Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
I think so. But just to clarify, would you want typically those, I'd say, sort of options that are presented in that analysis about, revenue and ridership response, those are typically developed, with engagement with local governments, with input from any public engagement that happened. Would you want some of those, I guess maybe you can clarify if you want that analysis sort of done first to maybe do it backwards to inform, the public, or to inform local governments about.
Well, I'll just repeat again. To build on what Tom was saying here, is that if we did this in parallel, like that the RDCK has already done a values conversation and are getting clear on what they're trying, why they even have a transit system, and what they hope to optimize or achieve with that transit system. City of Nelson has not done that. RDKB has not done that. So in parallel, we recommend that those respective partners, address that, spend some time with it. At the same time, to get in the queue, if we recommend that a fare review happen, we don't want to repeat that work. Like, if we're going to be doing it and really wrestling with the values, the why, we don't want that in the fare review, because then it just muddies the water. It might come back with a recommendation on increasing it X amount, but that recommendation is based on values we haven't even given the process, or that process happens at the same time that we're doing it, just duplicating work, basically muddying the water. However, if the fare review kept their focus on optimizing for ridership and optimizing for revenue, then that's the information we would need to then make an informed decision after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Director Lockwood?
Clarification. So we're taking values out of it for BC Transit to do the fare review.
That's my recommendation.
And leaving it with the local government to determine with the fare review.
Yeah.
So going off of the other two partners that haven't done this, that may not be in their strategic plan, how do we, so we're not wasting staff time and BC Transit's time in that, because I do believe that if it's that far down the road, we should get in the queue, because we can always pull out of the queue.
Yeah.
But we can't get back into the queue if we don't get in right now, right? So how do we demand the other two to work on it if it's not in their strategic plan to do it this year, in order for all this work to happen?
I think, if I may, it's a similar question to the motion essentially on the floor, right, in James' recommendation. If we recommend, pass this motion, ask BC Transit to initiate a review, they may then say, well, we don't feel that's enough authority. We need to talk to the City of Nelson and RDKB. Similarly here. Or we can pass a second motion asking our respective partners, either one. Unless anyone else has a different take on it. Any thoughts? No? Nobody's got any better ideas? Andy? Andy?
Thanks, all. Yeah, let's forge ahead with the review. The technical review that's being recommended, I would suggest that's a good way to go. At our table, I'm sure we can have a discussion about values. It will come down to the idea that once we see the technical review, I'm sure it'll be measured as far as a value review as well, just around the table. I don't think anything formal needs to be discussed at this point. I think our concern is costs as well, and I would like to see us forge ahead with some evaluation and impact to what a fair review would be, what the value it would bring to us for now. We talk about values all the time, so and I think it's fine for us to have that our own discussion at our own tables. Thanks.
Tom?
Respectfully to the chair, additionally, because the regional district of Central Kootenay has already been through this process, we can provide some resources to our partners in the service to see if these outcomes worked. And we also have resources in place that showed how we got to where we got here. It's not a process. We could provide that. I'm sure you could work through it relatively quickly to land.
Great. I think that would be great. Yeah, if you can just provide staff with that, and then we'll respectively get on the agendas at our tables. That would be great. Okay, so Director Main, we've offered additional guidance to BC Transit. It's not in the motion. I don't know if it needs to be.
Yes, amend the motion.
Oh, you, Director. So
I will amend the motion to add that that's what we're looking for, and removing the value piece, so you guys are not having to, you leave it with local government.
Yeah.
So I don't know I can't remember the two words, technical and ridership and
revenue.
Revenue. Those are the two words, to focus on ridership and revenue.
I think that's a friendly amendment.
I accept that as a friendly amendment. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just vote on the amendment, and then we'll vote on the main motion. So unless there's any comments or questions about the amendment, seeing none. Okay, all in favor of the amendment? And that carries. So now we're back to the motion. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none. All in favor of the motion to recommend? Thank you. And that carries. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Danica, you've got what you need. Yeah, excellent. All right. Now moving to the second bit of new business. This is, I think, Jen, you're going to cover this one. Mitigating unsafe bus maneuvers on Route 41 and 98.
Yes, thank you very much. I will share my screen here. Great. And then make sure I can see what I'm reading here. Great. Thanks, everyone. It's good to be here today to talk to you all about the routes 41 and 98. We'll start with just a reminder of who I am. I will provide a background to the presentation today, and then I'll dive into the Route 41 bins routing change, and then the Route 98 Columbia Connector routing scenarios, and we'll end with some questions if anyone has them. So hello, I am Jen Getz. Some of you may remember me. I am your transit planner. I work with the Thompson, Kootenay, Vernon, and Shuswap regions. I am responsible for the planning, all the planning pieces. So mainly routing. We also have schedulers who are play a slightly different role to myself. So I help plan, design, analyze, monitor, all that jazz for the efficient operation of our transit systems. I'm here today to inform the committee of an important operational update to improve safety. I will present a routing and bus stops change for Route 41 bins, as well as a couple of routing and bus stop change scenarios for the Route 98 Columbia connector. So starting right away with the Route 41 bins. This is a local trail route, and that's what it looks like there on this slide. It provides 6 round trips from Monday to Friday from 7:45 a.m. to 6 p.m. and 3 round trips on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that red arrow there is pointing to where there is currently a 3-point turn happening. That's at Nelson Avenue at Birch Avenue. And a safety audit was conducted for some routing alternatives. So the routing alternative to remove this 3-point turn is to remove that kind of squiggly portion of the route that's along those red X's there. So the route will be terminating at Bin Street at McAnally Street. So the full portion of the route that's being removed is Bin Street East, the eastern portion of Bin Street, Dockrell Street, and Nelson Avenue. So per direction, this is 670 meters. It's about 9 minutes by walking and 3 minutes by bus. There will also be 4 bus stops that are removed, and the stop level activity at these bus stops are 0.9 average boardings and 1.8 average alightings, so people getting off the bus. That's per weekday in 2024, so not per week, but per weekday. And on the weekends in 2024, we saw 0.1 average boardings and 0.5 average alightings. And that is very low. So a more moderately used bus stop may see 4 or 5 boardings a day, while a very well-used bus stop in trail would see about maybe 10 boardings a day for weekdays. And the implementation of this is scheduled for September 8th. All right, so that is the Route 41 change that will be happening. I'll now talk about the Route 98 Columbia connector. So an overview of this route, it's an express style service connecting downtown trail with the Selkirk College in Castlegar. It also serves the communities of Rivervale, Janelle, Fairview, Blueberry, and Southridge. If you look on the map online, there's more to it than the one that I'm showing you here. I just couldn't fit all the little maps onto my screen, but there is more to it. So currently there are 8 round trips offered on this route from Monday to Thursday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 9 round trips on Friday from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., and 3 round trips on Saturday from 9 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. So to improve safety, we are going to be removing the 3-point turn that is currently happening at Blueberry Creek. So this is a zoomed in map to the Blueberry portion of this route. And we have a couple of different service scenarios that I'm providing you with today. The first scenario is what we're calling the residential loop. It's 6 minutes total per round trip. So 1 round trip is to Castlegar and back. So 6 in total minutes would be the additional number of minutes added to the trip. This is about a 200 additional annual service hours. That's sort of the cost. There would be a new bus stop added. It's quite small probably on your screen there, but it is that blue kind of icon. That would be at 100th Street at Beresford Avenue. Some considerations here is just that it challenges the express nature of the route. So people currently are using this route, commuters, for a lot of people anyways, for getting to Castlegar and the Selkirk College. This does, though, maintain service to Blueberry Creek, and implementation of this would happen September 8th. And though it's not guaranteed, if this is the decided routing option, we would try to make the hours approval happen. This is just happening outside of our typical expansion process, so it's a little bit different than our usual process, but we would do the work to try to make the hours approval happen. The second scenario is to eliminate the bus stop at Blueberry Creek. So this would be more efficient in trip time. It would maintain that express nature of the route. And then longer term, there is the potential to engage the Ministry of Transit and Transportation for highway improvements, and to then reinstate the bus stop along the highway. So this does, in the near term, discontinue access to Blueberry Creek. And the implementation of this would also be for September 8th. So you may be asking, well, what's the impact of removing the bus stop here? There's currently 2 average boardings and 2.2 average alightings. Again, people getting off the bus, that's what that word means. And that's per weekday in 2024. And then for weekends, it was 1.2 average boardings and 1.3 average alightings. So this is a summary slide. So again, we've got scenario 1, which would introduce a residential loop into the Blueberry neighborhood. The benefits of that would be that a new bus stop would be, or a bus stop in Blueberry would be maintained. A new one would be put in at the 100th Street at Beresford Avenue location. This maintains service to the area. And then challenges would be that there would be additional resources required, so 200 additional annual service hours, and it challenges the express nature of the route. And then scenario 2, which would be discontinuing the service to Blueberry Creek and removing that stop, would streamline the service, so more efficient trip time. It would maintain the express nature of the route. And then there's potential, again, for highway improvements and to add the bus stop back in the future. The challenge with this option is that access to Blueberry Creek is discontinued, at least for the near term. So there's no decision for you today to be made, but there's a recommendation for the West Kootenay Transit Committee to receive the presentation as information. And that brings us to our questions. Thanks very much.
Okay. Do we have any, looks like Terry, you've got a question for Jen. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Jen, is there an opportunity for you to share that information with me about the Route 41 change in trail, just so I can share it with council?
I respectfully, through the chair, I believe there is that correct, Danica?
Yeah, the presentation will be shared. All the presentations that you've seen today.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor McFadden and then Director Wood.
Thank you. Through the chair. Process-wise, will this be coming to Castlegar's council to discuss what those cost implications are for the 200 additional hours? And what decision they want to make, or are you guys making this decision without us having input? Obviously, I have pretty huge concern. We were hoping our south end is already underutilized. The braid across the highway is a whole other subdivision. We've been trying to get a bus stop in for quite a long time. So now to take out the only other one across the road, it leaves a lot of people. It might not seem like a lot when you're only talking about 2 people, but there isn't another access at that end of town. So wondering what the process will be if that will be coming to my council to have conversation, or the timelines on that.
Through the chair, Danica, do you want to take this one to talk about decision making?
Yeah, I can. I might let Tom go first, and then I might provide some additional.
Respectfully to the chair, the information is incomplete at this time. It's not ready to go to elected officials. The request has been made to Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure regarding inclusion in minor transit betterments improvement. Their staff is now trying to figure out what kind of paving is going on in the area. Getting paving, like getting a pullout paved, if there's paving crews in the area, is generally pretty doable. They've been very amenable to doing those things in the past if they have crews in the area. If they don't have crews in the area, it can become quite a challenge. I'd like to have that information on hand prior to bringing something to council about that. My preference would be to establish a new fully functional stop with a paved pullout on the highway, eliminate the 3-point turn, but the result would be cost neutral. If we can't do that, then we would have to go to local government to actually consider an additional $200 an hour, or an additional 200 operating hours.
I'll add that one. I think one of the reasons this is being brought up at this committee is they just explore the funding and governance decisions for a route like this. So right now, the Route 98 is funded by the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary. I'll call this a bonus service for residents of Blueberry Creek. They don't directly fund this service. So it is an interesting topic of whose decision is this to make? And what role does Castlegar or the Regional District of Central Kootenay have in providing input to the decision maker or having a decision themselves? And I'm, hoping, I think, we're here to have some discussion, because from BC Transit's perspective, I look to the funding partner to make service level decisions, and I would be looking to the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary to ultimately be the decision maker on a service option like this. And that, I think, doesn't quite align with how this group works and who it serves, which is why we're bringing it forward to this committee now.
For sure. Supplemental?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks. Through the chair. The only correction I would make is the City of Castlegar pays into the RDCK's amount of transit. So they do pay for the service. They just don't pay the same amount as for our local services. Like, we are paying into the whole in some capacity. I do understand the complexity of the funding models. Just wanting to make sure that we figure out, as I wear two hats, as the partner, our City of Castlegar, can figure out how not to lose service to the south end without it becoming a cost to the whole system on their own. And I think there's probably a way to navigate that, considering we were already we were planning on spending money to put a bus stop in that end anyway, but then the price doubled within 6 months from BC Transit side, so we pulled it. But we did have money that we were willing to spend to make sure that end of town was being serviced. So I guess I'm just making sure that, because it sounds like the timelines are pretty quick, if you're talking about September, this change, that we're having those conversations early on what a solution might be, and that it just isn't stopped without any consultation, because the average public doesn't know that there's all these different funding streams. It'll be the City of Castlegar that owns that decision. So wanting to make sure that we're a part of that conversation and how we can be a good partner. Yeah. But anyways, so please make sure that whenever we can, that we reach out early, and this isn't a last minute decision, that we try and find a solution. Thanks.
Dr. Worley.
Yes, and through the chair, and thank you for that, Mayor McFadden. And if with your indulgence, I'd like to speak to this issue, to this particular item. Before I heard that it was indeed not as BC Transit's eyes being contributed toward by your city, even though that community is in recent years within the city boundaries, it is still a satellite community, a bedroom community, if you will, that has some distance between services and schools and things for Selkirk students or whatever, using that. And the rate that Castlegar is growing, and it's been in the news, how rapidly that community is growing and expanding. I would really hate to see this particular stop removed from the system, because as a small community, I have 8 pocket communities in Area B, and one of them being Janelle, and I would hate to see service stop there, because then you're putting more cars on the road, you're putting more people, and especially with the expansions that's going on in the Castlegar, in the RDCK in the Castlegar Lower Columbia area, I think that it's going to fill up with houses and people living in that area that will rely upon bus services, and to get one back again after it's been removed is quite the process. So I would support Mayor McFadden in hopefully in keeping this one going. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Director Worley. So seeing no other comments or questions, we do need a motion to receive this presentation as information. Okay, Director Lockwood, second by Director Worley. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. And now we're moving to Tom's going to lead us on a discussion of the Interior Health Authority funding for health connections. Tom.
Respectfully through the chair, staff are seeking direction from the committee regarding health connections funding. As has been mentioned at the West Transit Services Committee, and we're bringing forward to this committee, we're facing some challenges with the health connections funding right now. Health connections funding, before I go back to this, but health connections funding was initially intended to fund our health connections routes, those 70 series in the regional district of Central Kootenay. That includes the Caslow-Nelson, the Salmo-Nelson, the Nakusp-Nelson, and a couple rides on the number 99. Okay, that funding was set at about $196,000 a year. It increased gradually until COVID kicked in. When COVID kicked in, that increases to that funding stopped. Okay, but the provincial government was providing all kinds of other funding at that time, so it really didn't impact us, and we understood, because Health Connections was basically in the same circumstance that all of us were, and we were utilizing Safe Restart funding and COVID-related monies to ensure that those routes continued to, operate. Unfortunately, as COVID ended and the COVID funds dried up, there was no subsequent increase to that Health Connections funding. So Health Connections funding is effectively locked at 2022 levels, despite the fact that over the past several years, we've seen considerable increases in the cost of public transit. So what staff is looking for direction from this committee to enter into negotiations with Health Connections, so giving BC Transit effectively a mandate to negotiate with Health Connections for the renewed increases in funding starting at a 2022 level and moving forward in line with increases that we're seeing to the current cost of public transit.
Okay. So any questions for Tom? Okay, seeing none, we've got a recommendation from staff. Looking for a mover of the recommendation, or Director Popoff, Director Martin. And any comments or questions? Director Popoff, do you mind reading that motion?
Yes, I will. Moved by myself that the West Kootenay Transit Committee direct BC Transit on behalf of the local government funding partners for the West Kootenay Transit System to negotiate with IHA for increased funding for Health Connections Transit Services.
Okay. Any comments, questions? Okay. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone. That's the last item. We just need now a motion to adjourn. Oh, I don't have public time on my agenda. Do we have? Okay, we'll do some public time. I don't see anyone.
Wow.
I don't think she's still public. Oh yeah. Okay. So this is our public time. We have a few people on the call. I think. Oh, there's actually. So, if you would like to say something, now is your opportunity. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Okay, now I need a motion to adjourn. Director Lockwood, second, Director Worley, all in favor? And that carries. We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a couple months.